Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. On this podcast, we pull from the seemingly endless queue of movies, television shows, and maybe even other surprises along the way as part of our podcast channel from the queue. Please subscribe, like, and review from the queue on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, including Spotify and Apple. You can find us on our various social media channels at From the Queue. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, all our links will be in the description below. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Instagram at Jerome Cuson. You can find me on BlueSky at Jerome C1985. My co-host is Brian. He can be found on Twitter for now at Brian DeBrain. And Brian is going to be discussing and hosting here tonight because we are, of course, going to be reviewing two Planet of the Apes sequels. And there's a reason for this, which we will talk about a little bit later on. But, of course, we have reviewed, Brian and I in the past, the modern Apes trilogy, which both of us have found pretty fantastic. But now we are going back in time to discuss two Planet of the Apes sequels, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes.
They come from an incredible planet of apes. They survived a war beneath the planet of apes. Now it's Earth 1973, and you're in for a surprise. Are they friendly visitors or invaders from the future? Why does the president's advisor want them shot? What is baby Milo's incredible secret? All the surprising answers are in Escape from the Planet of the Apes. All new from 20th Century Fox, rated G, all ages. Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
America, in the year 1991, apes are sold at auction to become household pets and to work as slaves. They wait for a leader, an ape with the intelligence to lead them into overthrowing man.
Where there is fire, there is smoke. And in that smoke, from this day forward, my people will plot and plan for the inevitable day of man's downfall. And that day is upon you now!
Watch the screen explode as man faces ape in the ultimate revolution, a revolt of the apes.
This will be the end of human civilization!
Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Rated PG.
So me and Jerome have been wanting to talk about Conquest for a while now, ever since we did that series when we reviewed the new trilogy. Because growing up, it just feels like that was kind of like our favorite sequel. But for me, it was more like Escape and Conquest kind of go together. It's almost as if you can't really talk about one without the other because they're so closely written together and they're so they use each other's plots really like a lot, like they rely on each other. So it just made sense to not just review Conquest but also review both. And they're both 90-minute movies and they're really sci-fi heavy and they're low budget, and I just really appreciate this time period. Like I've been going back watching like 50, 60, 70 sci-fi movies and just appreciating the low budgetness of it all and getting like some kind of social message across. So I've been really into this kind of like style of filmmaking for a while now. I've just kind of come back to it lately, especially watching something like The Thing from Another World or like Forbidden Planet. You know what I mean? Just that kind of level of sci-fi that's kind of cheap but effective. And in this case, with these ape sequels, they really dropped the budgets on the sequels, intending to just make as much profit as possible. But because they kind of relied on the same writer for all the sequels, Paul Dean, it actually made it coherent. And thank God, because a lot of nowadays you have different writers on different sequels and there's never like a through line. But in this case, they kind of just went to Paul Dean and like, hey, you kind of wrote the original, we got the sequel coming out, and then he wrote Beneath, right? And then Beneath made money, right? Surprisingly, because I think people just expected it to just be like not as good, or it's not as good as the original, but it actually made money and enough money to make sense for a third movie, which is kind of shocking. And Arthur Jacobs, the producer of the whole series, sent a telegram to Paul Dean, the writer, and said, "Hey, apes exist, sequel required." So the joke there is, beneath of the Planet of the Apes, everyone dies. The whole Earth blows up. And even Charlton Heston hits the button because I guess he wanted to make sure that there would be no sequels after this. And he just said, okay, I want to hit the button and destroy Earth. That way there's never going to be a sequel again. Little did he know that the apes time traveled And we got this really interesting plot for Escape for the Planet of the Apes that leads to a very, very deep plot that's like a Civil War allegory in Conquest. But first, you got to start out with Escape, and it's it's that time travel fun that I like to have when I watched sci-fi movies. They have fun with the timeline, so to speak. And watching this as a kid, I was always blown away. Like, wow, they went back in time, and now everything seems to be coming. For whatever the historical events that they talk about in this movie start taking place in the fourth and fifth movie. So as a kid, I was like, wow, this is like a complete loop. You know what I mean? It just makes perfect sense that this will just inevitably happen. But upon recent viewing of this film, they're actually talking about the multiverse in this, and they're actually alluding that this is an alternate timeline, kind of like the Kelvin timeline in Star Trek, where going back in time did not create a single timeline loop. It just created an alternate timeline, which fucks things up even further, because according to the timeline, the events that start taking place in Conquest don't actually happen until 200 years after their initial, historical records, meaning the apes going back in time really fucked things up. And that mystical disease that killed all the pets in the Planet of the Apes universe that they kind of talk about in the new trilogy as well a little bit, that actually is sped up now, because those events were supposed to take place like 200 years into the future, but because these apes, Zira and Cornelius and Dr. Milo, go back in time, I think what ends up happening is like they are like the start of the plague, whether they know it or not, and it ends up speeding up the timeline drastically, which I was not picking up on as a kid, because if you watch it now, it's like, oh shit, they really messed up the timeline by speeding things up by 200 years, kind of like what the X-Men films did in the later movies. So I was just kind of blown away as like the whole concept of multiverse in this series. Like I wasn't even thinking that. I thought it was one complete loop, and little did I know that it was just this multiverse thing going on. So Escape from the Planet of the Apes is a lot going on for it, man. Like if you like examine the dialogue in this movie and the way that the characters are acting and adapting, it's very not just entertaining, but like a very interesting character study on these apes as to how they are just like, they basically gonna charm the humans into not thinking that they're hostile until by the end of the movie, once they start, when Zero reveals what they were actually doing to the humans, it leads to that dark ending. But yeah, Jerome, I know that we're going to talk about Conquest, and that's one of your favorites, but Escape, I mean, listen, we love time travel movies, and this feels like one of the better early attempts at, time travel movies, whether we just don't even think about it or not. But I love this movie a lot. It's not a great plot, but I just love the concept of the low budgetness of it all, and the fact that like Zira is like my favorite character in the series, and she gets to act so much more in this lead role in the movie. So a lot going on for it.
I mean, Escape from the Planet of the Apes is very much a showcase for Kim Hunter. She is in the original Planet of the Apes. She has a supporting role in Beneath, but as much as Roddy McDowall is kind of the showcase character, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, Escape is very much Kim Hunter's movie, and you can see why. The fact that she plays such an important role, because of course she gets pregnant. It really works. It really works. I think Escape is solid. I think it's a good movie. I don't know that it's a great movie, but I think that it does its job well. I would say. I think it functions really well. You have the early death of one of the apes is played by Salmoneo. Salmoneo, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years later, was killed. So it's really fascinating that I guess he wasn't supposed to die at that time. I'm just very curious, like when he was going to die, because narratively it actually does kind of make sense to kill one of the apes early on, because then you're really just focusing on Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter. But yeah, I just think the performances across the board in terms of what Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowall are doing in Escape, I think their chemistry is really good. I just think that the thing about 3 is that it is, I think the last 30 minutes, or let's say 20 minutes, I think are really good. I think the rest of the movie kind of limps along. It's not a really plot-heavy movie. You really it is much more of a character study. It is much more vibes than anything else, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think Conquest quite clearly has the stronger of the two plots. But I think what Escape does is it really sets up Conquest well, and that's kind of what you want, right? If you're gonna do these sequels, then you want to set them up really well. And with Beneath, they seemingly closed the door and kind of had to dig themselves out of a hole, but very clearly at the end of 3, there is that intention of another sequel because of the tease of the song. No, I think that it's Escape is just a solid movie. Again, it's not the greatest movie, but I really appreciate what they're going for. And granted, this is a movie that is very much made on a budget, but I think they use the budget well. And I don't think it comes across as cheap. Like, we know it's low budget, but I don't think you watch this movie and you're like, well, this looks really cheap.
For sure, and I think Paul Dean, I hope I'm saying his name right. It's Dehn, but like I said, he wrote all the sequels, so he has that through line. And thank God they just stuck to the same writer, because at least this way you can stick to the same through line. Like I said, and in this case, like, he's a really talented writer. He wrote Goldfinger, which is like top 3 Bond for me, plus some other stuff that I'm probably forgetting off the top of my head. But that's the one that sticks out the most for me. So this guy's got a lot of talent when it comes to writing, and you can tell, like, he probably was thinking in the back of his head, well, if they're going to ask me to do this again for a 4th one, at least I could set this up, and then even if there's no 4th movie, you still get that ending where the baby lives, and that something is going to happen, and either he's going to lead the revolution, or he's going to be the great grandfather of the person that started the revolution. But like I said, because of the timeline, they sped things up because they kind of screwed up. I'm talking about the Apes because they brought that disease with them, so that kind of sped the whole timeline up and screwed things up. But I got to mention the bad guy in this one, Dr. Otto Hasland. He's played by Eric Braeden. I don't know, he's kind of stiff in this role, but I feel like he's doing this like, Elon Musk slash Thanos type of like character, where he's very like methodical and very intellectual, but by the end of the movie he just becomes this rotten son of a bitch that you just want to kill and smack in the face. But I guess that's part of like his character. That's where the character arc goes for that villain, because at first he's questioning like whether or not the apes have good intentions. What are they doing here? And he's the one that comes up with the concept of the multiverse. He's saying that, like, there was one scene where he's on the news and he's just talking about how you can go back in time here, but you don't know if you're creating an alternate timeline or in the same, or you're in the same timeline. And it's just very like, okay, what are we talking about here? Until you get to the 4th movie and realize, oh, they created an alternate timeline. So he was kind of right. And, they could kind of talk about this in like Endgame and Infinity War and all that kind of thing. So I thought that was just a really interesting scene and conversation that the bad guy was having, but also it opens up the door for even more possibilities, which you can throw in all the other Apes sequels after that, like the new timeline and everything can all fit in this giant timeline, I guess, if you kind of think of it like the MCU and the multiverse. So I really like that concept, and it really didn't stick out to me until this latest viewing that, oh, no wonder we can have all these different Apes movies now, even the Tim Burton one, because the multiverse. So I'm really digging into that idea, because I used to think this was like one complete loop, but it's not. And Ricardo Montalban shows up at the end of this movie, and I was just disappointed that we didn't get enough of him, because he's so good. Like, he's chewing scenery in this movie, considering that like Kim Hunter is like the star of the show in this, and Roddy McDowell's like second tier. But like, man, like, he was just so great in the circus scenes that he's in, and then in Conquest I think he does a better job. But I just wanted more of him. But we got a lot more of him in Conquest, so that was really fun. And you mentioned the last 20 minutes being really good. I just kind of felt like the last 20 minutes are just kind of rushed, because it just felt like, oh no, what do we do? Like, they drop all the information. The government is like, okay, now we know the truth. We're gonna have to like kill your baby, which I thought was just it's such a dark thing. And then not only that, it's just like they escape and they did have the baby. So now what are you gonna do? And of course, the bad guy has no hesitations or qualms to kill the baby. And we see that, which is so dark and unfortunate. And I think the reaction for the humans that are watching from afar on the boat at the end, I think that just adds like to the horror and like the sadness, because you see their perspective of it and they're just horrified. and then it's just like a really dark ending that still kind of like to this day is very disturbing. You see like the baby gets shot, poor Cornelius gets shot, and then takes this incredible bump, breaking his legs on the floor, and you see Zira just lying over him weeping, and then she's dying as well. It's such a dark ending, but then once you see that their son actually does live, I think that's, one of those things where it's like, oh, one of those moments, because I do remember it was either my mom or dad watching this with me as a kid, and I don't think they'd watch this either. And then once they reveal that the baby lives at the end, I just clearly remember someone going, "Oh, the baby lived," and it's like this happy ending mixed with the darkness. But I think if you killed the baby in this one, not only do you kill the franchise, but like it will be one of those darkest endings of all time, kind of thing, like Seven or something like that. But at least the baby lives. But
And
still,
let's be clear, a baby monkey still died. It just wasn't the baby monkey that we wanted to live.
that's what
Right?
I'm saying too. It was still like, holy shit, this dude shot a baby monkey with no hesitation. Like, that's a dark motherfucker. That's a dark villain kind of turn. And not only that,
You
he was just
think?
manipulating. He was manipulating her the second half of the movie. I thought that was just like, wow, this dude went from like this intellectual scientist to this evil son of a bitch. So that was a really good turn for him. But yeah, I think it's a fun 90-minute movie. And I really like Jerry Goldsmith's score in this, and surprisingly, it's him. But it doesn't sound like a normal Planet of the Apes score. It just sounds like a '60s movie score, where it's like a movie that takes place in the late '60s, early '70s, and it was very not heavy like the original Planet of the Apes score is. But man, it does like set the mood for a lot of these scenes where like they're trying to be contemporary, and you see the apes like buying clothes, going to museums, watching TV, and it just feels like, oh, this is a totally different take, and it was kind of refreshing to see. And for a budget of 2 million, it grossed 12 million, so you got to make another one, right? Which leads us into Conquest. But overall thoughts, ratings, I got to go with 7 out of 10 for this one. Like you mentioned, it's not a great movie. I just like it a lot, just because the budget and what it's got going for it, and the fact that the makeup is good. Because like in the next movie, clearly you can't do that for just three apes. You gotta make good makeup for everybody, and that didn't work. But at least they had good makeup for all three apes. And I just feel like Dr. Milo's character was cut short way too quick, because I think he was a great character, but unfortunately that makeup just did not gel with him, and they had to cut him early. But you feel like it kind of contributed to the plot as a whole.
I can definitely see that. I think the ending is a little rushed, but clearly there is some sort of a mandate that said we want a movie that is only 90 minutes long. I would say that is also true for Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And look, I am never going to complain about a 90-minute movie, given the fact that every movie feels like it just has to be 2 hours long at this point, if not longer. I'm not going to complain that this was too short. I like the fact that Ricardo Montalban is kind of set up to be a bigger character in the next one. So the lack of him in this third one doesn't really bother me as much. But I will say, I think there is a huge difference. Even though Escape from the Planet of the Apes comes out in 1971, Conquest comes out in 1972. I don't know about you, but to me, it very much feels like these are two movies that come out almost in different decades. Like, it is shocking. And again, both movies kind of have a darkness to them, but Escape from Planet of the Apes feels like a movie that came out in the 60s. Conquest very much feels like a creature of the 70s. It feels like it is definitively a movie that came out in the 1970s more so than Escape. I think it has to do with the look, the design, the feel of it. Just you watch a movie from the 1970s, and Conquest, I think, gives you that vibe more so than Escape.
And a year later, this movie comes out, and right off the bat, I want to mention this was filmed at the University of California, Irvine, designed by a futurist architect named William Perea. But at the time, like the buildings were only like 6 years old. But if you look at those like buildings, it just kind of fits with that mood of the movie is, and the tone. It's like it's futuristic, but like bleak. And I know that sounds weird to kind of put together in a sentence, but like these buildings look really futuristic, but there's like no like life to them. They just seem so like dark, and like a lot of concrete, not a lot of bright colors in this other than like the uniforms. But like it just seems like a dark dystopia, right? And I think that's the vibe that he was going for, the director. And gotta mention the name J. Lee Thompson because he also directed Cape Fear, and I'm a big fan of Cape Fear from 1962. I'm a bigger fan of Cape Fear than I am of the 90s remake, to be honest. But I think he's a really good director, and I think with Conquest, he really kind of was like, okay, what is going on with the world right now? And of course, it's the civil rights movement, and of course, like I mentioned, Paul Dean, same writer as the third one, comes aboard, writes this one, knowing what the story is going or where the story is going, and layering it with the whole civil rights movement and the as an allegory. This movie just kind of works really, really well, and it's set in 91, but like I mentioned before, these events are not supposed to take place until 200 years in the future of this time or whatever the original timeline. But because the apes go back to 1972, uh, I guess one of them had like the genes or whatever of the virus that does end up killing the majority of the dogs and cats, or all the dogs and cats in the world, which leads to the humans domesticating more chimpanzees into like more less than a pet role, more into a slave type role. And over like what 10 years, the apes started growing and evolving. So something is up. It's like the humans know something is really fucked up right now, and they just have like they're just clinging on to this last bit of control they have, right? And they're using them as slaves. Um, and it's obviously going to backfire. It's like something is going to happen here because these you're making these apes smarter, but you're trying to keep them dumb at the same time, and that's just not going to work. Like if there was even if there was no no, it's not Cornelius. If there was no Caesar, there would have been an ape that would have came along and still did the same thing. He might not be able to communicate like Caesar, but there would have been an ape to do the same thing. It just feels like it was inevitable. And Caesar just happened to be the guy because he's an ancestor from the original ape line, right? And he's talking, and he's the only one that can talk, which is very interesting the way that they play that off in this movie because a lot of the times he has to play dumb in front of the humans, and it's really like you got to be really like focusing in on what's going on to realize how smart of a performance that Roddy McDowall is giving as his own son, but like playing off the fact that he's got to be smart and dumb at the same time. Like I like for example the scene where he's being shown how to pour what is it a scotch with water, right? So he purposely puts the scotch in correctly, but he purposely fucks up the water part to make it seem he's not that intelligent. He just happens to be really good at instructions, and then kind of wave it off until the governor realizes at the end of the movie, oh shit, that's Caesar, you know. So they really did the performance, or he really did the performance well, and it's weird. Like at the beginning of the movie, I still don't know why, but for some reason it seems like he's never been in the major cities before, and they don't even tell you what city this is, which I like. It's kind of you know kind of fill in the blank with whatever city you want it to be, and it's gonna lead to the other cities falling as well, which they allude to at the end. But at the beginning of the movie, it's like he's handing out flyers for the circus, and he's just in shock. He's like he's never seen Aves in slavery before, and which is kind of like wow, because that makes me think like it made me want to see like a good 5 minutes of him in the circus before he comes to the city to kind of see that naivete and how it kind of like plays out when he finally sees all these slave apes in the city, right? So that kind of made me want more out of the plot, right? But they never show that. But you kind of see it through his eyes. It's like he's in shock, and then by the end of the trip, he's like screams out, "You human bastards!" Right? And then of course that leads to Ricardo Montalban as Armando pretending he said it, getting arrested, covering up for him, and poor Caesar has to go undercover with the apes to not get killed or get caught. So it leads to this little thing where it's like, okay, now he's infiltrated unintentionally like ape society, right? And now through learning and experience, he's starting to realize, hey, maybe I can start a revolution, right? But he doesn't probably really think about that until he realizes that Armando gets killed when he's in, uh, when he's captive with the authorities, right? So it's almost as if like he was thinking about it, and then once he just loses his father figure, he just says, "Fuck it, I'm gonna start a revolution." But then there's this part in the movie where I feel like okay, they skipped some scenes or they didn't film some scenes because it goes from him crying, which is great performance by Roddy McDowall in that scene. But then all of a sudden he's like gathering up all these weapons with all the other apes. I'm like, what the hell? Even as a kid, I was just kind of like, there's something missing here. And even in the director's cut that I didn't even know existed that I watched, they still don't explain it. So there's kind of like some missing scenes. It feels where he's just going from like crying to all of a sudden gathering up all these weapons, and he's not even like talking to the apes; they're just listening to him. So I was kind of like fascinated. It's like, what is he telling these apes that makes him so like believe in him? Like, what's this cult like status that he's getting with the apes? And we never kind of get into that, other than maybe in the third act where he's just kind of pointing here and commanding. But it just feels like there's some scenes missing in the middle.
I agree. They're very much going for a tight 90 minutes here as well. I think that there is a lot of shorthand. I think with movies like this, you're not always going to get everything explained. I am still very impressed by the performances and just some of the darkness, the directions they go. I think Ricardo Montalban's death scene is pretty dramatic. And again, Ricardo Montalban is somebody that, you watch him as Khan in Star Trek 2 or even on the series, and he's just very out there. He is chewing the scenery. He's chewing the scenery in these movies as well, and that's kind of the actor that he is. But he's just so good at it. He is just so tremendous at playing whatever role that he is given. He is very charismatic, and it's just sad to me that we don't have more like really big movie performances out of Ricardo Montalban. Like, yes, he was in the original version of Fantasy Island, so we had that, but we don't necessarily have a lot of great movie performances from him. So this is definitely a treat. And again, I think some of the other characters, I mean, this is not a great character-driven piece. This is really Roddy McDowall carries this movie, and if his performance doesn't work, then the movie doesn't work. But my goodness, is he just tremendous here from the beginning and up until the last speech. I think it's really, really good stuff. And just the city, the urban elements. I mean, yes, Escape takes place in an urban environment, but I feel like the kind of the city aspect just is so much more important in this movie because they're kind of they're not quite going for a dystopian feel, but like we are on the edge of a dystopia, and that vibe is very much enhanced by the city. So again, just a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous stuff from Roddy McDowall down to some of the set design, which look, I mean, again, was made on the cheap, but for the most part, I didn't really notice it.
For sure. And the version I watched is the director's cut. Now, I didn't even know there was a director's cut until I put in the Blu-ray disc. And then I started to realize, oh, this is probably why the Planet of the Apes Blu-ray set is worth a lot of money now, because I spent like $17 on it used like 5 years ago. Now it's worth like $80 used, 120 like unopened. And I looked it up, and I don't think this version of the movie exists on any streaming sites. It's all the theatrical cut. So I was kind of fascinated, and I was kind of like, okay, what's the difference here? And it's clearly like the violence. Like the violence is clearly like more grindhouse level. You see more apes getting shot in the face, which I just that was hard to watch, and I was not expecting that. And so much so the ending is different to the point where like it's literally a different like feel. Like so the ending of the theatrical cut is like they let the governor live, and he learns that you know even though that the humans were not humane, quote unquote, to them, he's going to be humane to them, right? And the director's cut, that goes all out the window, and he goes, "The day is upon you now," and he commands the gorilla apes that just beat the governor to death, and that's the end of the movie. And I'm just like, whoa, dude, this is gnarly. Like I feel both endings work, but man, that darker ending is just so like radical, because it's just like, whoa, this dude just does not give a fuck anymore, and he's all about the apes, and he doesn't care about humans. And at one point, there's that governor assistant, that the black man who sympathizes with the apes because of his past history and his slavery from 200 years ago. So he sympathizes with them, and he's asking him, please don't kill the governor. And director's cut, he just clearly ignores him, kills him. And there's no sympathy, there's no empathy, and that's the darker ending. I like both, man. So I would say like the director's cut is kind of like almost like an 8 out of 10 for me. The regular cut's like a 7.5, but man, this director's cut is like it's all it is the violence, but it just ups, it just raises the stakes a little bit, and you realize how brutal that this whole war brewing is going to be or is. And they talk about how, like, what do you plan to do? Like, even if you lead a revolt now, like, you could die tomorrow, and all these humans can come and kill you tomorrow. And he's like, there will be no tomorrow, whatever. It's like he's talking about all the other cities as well, talking about how everyone's going to hear about us and lead to everyone else rising up in other cities too. So that was kind of some powerful stuff right there. So the endings for both work. But I'm kind of disappointed that Jerome hasn't seen the director's cut ending yet. I highly recommend Jerome you go watch that on YouTube, because it is fucking gnarly and badass.
So what you're saying is there is no tomorrow.
Oh boy, there is no tomorrow, indeed, man. But man, even the difference in speech is, it's like, wow, this ending is so much. I don't know. I think it's better, to be honest, because it's just like that sappy, happy ending gone, and that motherfucker is dead now.
I mean, kind of deserves it. You could certainly make an argument. I mean, do you want the MLK ending or do you want the Malcolm X ending? That's the big question, right?
Oh, I see where you're going with this, and I kind of joked about mutants, apes. You know, what do you
I
know?
mean, not quite, but this is literally. I mean, MLK was civil disobedience and nonviolence, and Malcolm X, especially when he was in the Islamic religion, and he was definitely more ingrained in the idea of militancy and black power and things of that nature. So that's why I propose which ending do you want, but I'm certainly going to go ahead and check out that ending when we get done. But I mean, to me, this movie is an 8 out of 10, even with the original ending. I still think the original ending, it's got some balls to it still. Like, it's not totally muted, and I very much feel like this is one of the more underrated movies that we've discussed here on the podcast. I just think that this is a movie that really, it's the fourth movie in a franchise. I mean, you look at a lot of other fourth movies, and I don't know that you're necessarily going to find as a lot that are better than this one. And I mean, this is just it's tremendously impressive what they are able to do in the time given, the characters, Roddy McDowell's performance, and yeah, I'm a huge fan of this movie. This is one of my favorite sequels. And look, we're gonna be doing something special with the entire Apes franchise soon enough. But all I can say is Conquest is well worth checking out. Escape is very good and certainly worth seeing as well. But what they accomplish in Conquest, in my mind, is one of the most impressive things I think I've ever seen. Because again, this is a movie that you could just easily give up on and not care about. But there was a lot of time put in, and there's a lot of effort put in.
Yeah, even with a budget of 1.7 million, gross 9.7 million, so money, and of course that leads to Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which we kind of frown upon a little bit, but yeah, this is where kind of like the makeup, because there's so many apes in this one, is just kind of like, ugh. So I mean, you see that some of them are wearing masks. You see that Roddy McDowell's makeup is not as good as like the previous movies, but that's kind of the thing with the budget in this. But if you can get past that, the story is where it's at, and I think the performance with Roddy McDowell is definitely his best performance in all of his 4 movies. He wasn't actually in Beneath. I used to think that as a kid. He was not in that one. They replaced him. He came back for the 3rd one and the 4th one and the 5th one. But I mean, not a lot of people can play their own son.
And he was in the TV show, if you remember, Brian. He was in the show.
I know that too, and which I don't think in continuity wise that actually exists, but still, like, this dude like embraced the role of both Cornelius and Caesar, and
I
there's a
mean,
clear distinction.
he's basically like Anthony Daniels. Like, Anthony Daniels does everything Star Wars, but yeah, that's kind of the equivalent.
Yeah, for sure, and I mean the fact that he can distinguish like Caesar and Cornelius, I feel like there's a big distinction in his performances. Like, for example, I think one of my favorite lines in the 3rd one is like, they staying at the hotel and he's got to fill in the hotel registry and it says address, and everyone's just like, address, what do we put? And then he looks at him and he's like, charmingly, the zoo. So I thought, oh, okay, this guy gets it. But then when he is Caesar, that's when the emotions come out. And I think that's I think the best scene of him in Conquest is him looking at the poster, remembering Armando and just crying and just losing it. Like that was some real emotional stuff, and I feel like that's what really takes the movie to the next level after that point, because that's when he starts the revolution. So, um, really cool stuff. I just wanted more of like some of the detail because it does feel like it goes from him crying to all of a sudden gathering all these weapons. It's like, how did he command all these apes to do this? And then I want to mention this too. Like in the ending, I don't know if it was just my version, but Jerome has talked about it before, where like somehow there's like endless amounts of zombies that keep coming out of nowhere. That gimmick, it just felt like apes were coming out of nowhere by the end of it to overcome the humans. It just seems like they were outnumbering the humans like 10-1 by the end of it all, because even the humans are like, where do these apes come from? So it's just like, oh, Jerome's gonna love this because they just keep showing up out of nowhere. But yeah, 8 out of 10 for me. Director's cut, 7.5 the regular cut. And this is a setup for what we're gonna do next month, and we're gonna be ranking the Apes movies, all of them, including the Tim Burton one. And I guess by then, including the new one, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. We'll see how that goes, because for this series right now, I kind of wanted to go more of a spiritual kind of route, like where, like religion wise, what are these apes, 300 years after the events that we know, spiritually, where are they? I'm more fascinated with that for some reason. So we'll see if we get that, but it just seems like more of, you know, this relationship between the humans and the apes. Where does it go? Are they gonna be friends? Are they gonna be enemies in this alternate timeline? In the case of like these sequels, the original sequels, like Battle of the Planet of the Apes, shows you that they do change the timeline and that humans and apes do coexist. So I don't know if Battle is going to take or be more of an influence for Kingdom coming out, because that's what it seems like where it's going. But I don't know. I kind of want this relationship between the humans and the apes to kind of be solidified already, if you're not going to give us a straight up Planet of the Apes remake. So I don't know. We'll see. I feel like
I don't
there's a
know.
lot.
Like that's where we're headed. That's what it feels like. We're in the direction we are eventually building up to, where they're just going to do a straight up remake.
I mean, I wanted that, but I don't know because it seems like they're going out of order. Like it seems like you should do a Planet of the Apes before like a Battle for the Planet of the Apes, right? But I don't know.
I mean, I don't know.
Because like eventually the humans and the apes should be coexisting, right? Like that's the happy ending that we all kind of want. But I feel like we're still ways away from that, because it seems like in the next movie, the humans are just like.
I mean, I'm going to guess that I guess they want another trilogy. That's what I'm going to guess. That's what Disney wants. So I guess we're going to find out very soon. Let's just pretend the Tim Burton version doesn't exist for everybody's sake, though.
I'll just say this: it's got great makeup, like probably some of the best makeup in the whole series.
Yeah,
but that's it.
It doesn't matter. It is a genuinely embarrassing piece of filmmaking, all things considered.
For sure. So that kind of wraps up our discussion of these two Ape sequels that we loved as kids. Some on Sci-Fi Channel, probably a lot, and yeah, it's kind of leading up to the big release of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and our ranking episode that's coming up as well. And next week, I'm also hosting, because we're continuing our baseball journey, so to speak. It's the second inning, and it's going to be Major League, because I had to look this up. Like I said, Major League and Field of Dreams came out 2 weeks apart, but Major League is the one that came out first, April 7th, I believe. So that kind of fits with what they're doing, because it does come out like around the opening of the baseball season, and that movie opens up with the start of the baseball season. So a lot to talk about next week. It's one of probably one of me and Jerome's like favorite sports movies. There's a lot going for it. There's a lot of interesting discussion to be talking about with the Rene Russo character at the end, because I have some theories on that. But yeah, Major League is going to be a lot of fun to talk about, and we get to talk about what's going on in the baseball world, of course. We'll talk about that, and how the Dodgers are barely hitting with runners in scoring position, which scares the shit out of me. But on the other hand, the White Sox are just not trying, apparently. So there you go. Anything else?
Yeah, we're not going to talk about the White Sox unless it's within the context of these movies, because boy, oh boy, is it bad. It's just really, really awful.
Yeah, that's kind of how I won some money in Vegas, by just betting against the White Sox in a parlay. So
that's what I would do.
For sure. So that kind of wraps up our discussion. We'll talk to you next week, talking about Major League. And please check out our episode that we just kind of recently dropped, a YouTube exclusive It's the X-Men 97 kind of reviews we've been doing. It's the latest 2 episodes. Stormy gets her powers back, and I kind of called it. So there you go. My name is Brian. That's Jerome. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.